Okay, good morning. I was going to say welcome to the show, but we already had the show, so that was quite an amazing start in the morning. Some practical information. One, never wear your woolen suit in Singapore. That's a note to self. Two, there's going to be no fire drills today, so if there is the sound of an alarm, please wait for the tannoy instructions, calmly make your way to the exits, to the escalators. Three, you could download the event app. There is some instructions in the emails you received. You can connect with delegates, you can check the full agenda, and you can find your favorite exhibitor or speaker. And four, and finally, if you take any photos of people on stage, elsewhere, please use the hashtag #RechargeEvents, so that's two E's after each other. It makes it easy for us to repost on social media. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Recharge Wind Power Summit Asia Pacific, powered by WindEnergy Hamburg. My name is Ole Petter Pedersen. I'm the publisher of Recharge and head of renewable energy publications of DN Media Group. And on behalf of DN Media Group and the Recharge team, I would like to thank Hamburg Messe and Congress, Enterprise Singapore, and the Singapore Tourism Board for the excellent cooperation that is leading up to this inaugural event. It would not have been possible without that collaborative effort. After the pandemic, I think most of us, even natural introverts like myself, better appreciate the joy and inspiration we get from coming together to discuss common issues and from meeting someone who could turn out to be a new business acquaintance or even a new friend. And what could be more inspiring than meet to talk about wind energy? I'm privileged enough to be paid to write about renewable energy. I work mostly out of Norway, a country rich in wind, but also rich in opposition to the wind turbines, both onshore and offshore. Recharge covers the whole world, and we do see the challenges the industry is facing. To me, the people here working in the wind industry, you work in the most important industry in the world. I do not say that because I'm infatuated with nuts, bolts, and blades, fascinating as they can be, but without a successful wind industry, it's very hard to see how electrification can succeed. So, you have the most important jobs in the world right now, and isn't that great? But this industry faces many challenges that needs to be addressed. The heart of the issue, as I see it, is that this industry must be profitable. Without reasonable profits, there will not be enough private capital to fund the expansion needed to succeed in the mission possible, electrification. Over these 2 days, I hope you will meet interesting new people to talk to, discuss ideas with, and listen to. When we meet in the room, rather than on screen, there is this undefined, sometimes magical chemistry that sparks ideas, thoughts, and visions. The wind industry is not faultless. You are not perfect. As a publisher, it's my responsibility to hold power to account. Our journalism can sometimes be uncomfortable, sometimes motivating, but it should always be insightful. And in gaining greater insight, accepting our imperfections, and staying open to new ideas, therein lies a path to prosperity and success. As we may now move on to the main part of the agenda, may I once again warmly thank our partners, Hamburg Messe and Congress, the Singapore Tourism Board, and Enterprise Singapore. We have all collaborated and shared ideas to develop this event, and it shows what is possible when we work together. Enjoy these 2 days. So, let's get to it, and let me welcome on stage my colleague, senior correspondent Gareth Chetwynd of Recharge, who will guide you through the panel discussions. Is there enough political momentum to drive the expansion of wind in Asia? Please.
Hello. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Ole Petter. It's very good to be here. I'm going to invite my distinguished panel members up in a moment. Just a very, very quick off-script moment. I'd just like to say it's particularly nice for me to come to Singapore. I've never actually been to Asia before, but Singapore in particular. I spent many years as a correspondent in Brazil covering oil and gas, especially offshore industries, and I had a lot of contact with the Singapore shipyards. I've written so many stories, and it's a place I feel like I already know a little bit, so I'm finally glad to come here. Anyway, enough of me. I would like to invite my panel members up to the stage, please. I will introduce you actually after they've taken their seats. So could you come and join me, please? Any of these three seats? Yeah, any of these three seats. Right.
Spread out.
I was told there was going to be names above your seats, but please take your seats. Yeah.
Take a seat.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you. Okay, so I would like to introduce you. We're very lucky to have with us here. To my immediate left, we have His Excellency Leif Trane, who is Norwegian Ambassador to Singapore, who's held various positions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Norway, including Director in Section for Trade Policy and Economic Analysis, and Director in Section for Organizational Development. He has been posted to Riyadh and twice to Washington. Next to him we have Noriyosha Fukuoka, who is Director of Japan's WindEnergy Project Promotion Office under the Agency for Natural Resources and Energy, which is part of his decades-long experience working within Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, famous METI, as well as Cabinet Office and other agencies. And he's held several trade positions at METI, including Principal Deputy Director and Southwest Asia Director of the Trade Policy Bureau. And next to him we have Rhiannon Harries, Deputy Trade Commissioner for Asia Pacific with the UK Department of Business and Trade, who covers Southeast Asia from her base at the British High Commission in Singapore and leads a team of 90 staff across the region. Previous positions included Director for Better Regulation Executive and Deputy Trade Commissioner for South Asia based in New Delhi. Her career has included a lot of exposure to business, energy, civil nuclear policy, national security. So, to begin our discussion, just my opening remarks / question. It's been a complicated few years for wind. We've had industry headwinds, supply chain constraints, inflation, high interest rates, and we have seen in Europe and also in Asia, nations looking to reset auction terms to rebuild investments. Now, a new oil shock is underlying the importance of energy security and homegrown energy. So it feels like we're at a crossroads, and perhaps it's time to hope for a big policy push around the region for wind. But of course, oil shocks bring challenges. Inflation, the burden of, for example, price caps and protecting consumers, and the effect on GDP, interest rates, maybe defense spending. This can all affect our ability to finance projects. So, big issues there. But I'd like to ask for some initial comments, perhaps from all three of you, about the policy, the question we're here to discuss. Let's have some initial thoughts on the policy momentum at this crossroads moment. Where is it taking us, and where do we want to go? When I say us, I mean wind energy in Asia Pacific and its partners in Europe and elsewhere. So, Ambassador, at this moment, if you look at the way policy is pushing or is not pushing wind around this region now, what do you see at this current moment?
I think we're seeing that the policies are pushing wind, but you mentioned it, Gareth, and I think others have mentioned it as well, that there are still a few bottlenecks. You do need to make it profitable, as was said in the introduction to this panel. You could also end up in a situation that you've had now in the defense market, where a lot of companies, a lot of countries at the same time want to develop this, and it takes a lot longer to develop the capacity than it takes for sort of new projects. So that's why I think it's so helpful to see all of the companies here that are already building capacity, because otherwise you'll have more money chasing the same capacity, which will basically mean higher prices, but not necessarily more wind. But yes, you are seeing it. I think everyone realizes, as was said by several of the speakers, Dr. Tan Struan from the IEA, that you need to diversify. And although the wind doesn't blow as hard and as often here in Singapore as I guess the authorities would like, it still is blowing hard and pretty consistently in many other places in Asia. And wind is definitely one of the resources that I think the region will avail themselves of. But they do, as has also been mentioned, have a job to do with everything regarding the grid connectivity and quite a few other issues. But yes, there is definite momentum.
Thank you. Okay, so Director Fukuoka.
Yes.
In general terms, at Japan, since the crisis in Iran in the Hormuz Strait, how has the scenario affected Japanese policy thinking in recent months?
Yes, I consider that our policy momentum of the offshore wind is now higher than before, because our offshore wind is not only the energy policy, but also the security policy. So that's why we are now would like to diversify the energy sources and seeking for the domestic energy, like that Asian countries. So the importance of the offshore wind is increasing in Japan. And not only the offshore wind, but also some nuclear or the coal-fired LNG. We have to diversify the energy sources. Adding to that, it's very important point that the offshore wind is an industrial policy also, and building resilient supply chain regionally is very important. That's why the policy momentum is increasing in Japan now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll come back to that, of course. Rhiannon, in your sort of travels around the region, how have you perceived the sort of policy push or the general impetus in terms of wind at the moment?
Thanks, Gareth, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. As a frequent traveller around Southeast Asia, I've observed the couple of years that I've been in role, renewable energy, including wind power, being an increasing central part of political discussions, be that at the ASEAN level or when we're working with governments bilaterally. And hearing about renewable energy transition being not just about climate ambitions, but also being needed to provide secure, stable energy supply for the future, to encourage investment in other sectors like AI and data centres. And that, I think, has been a key part of shifting the ambition to where it is today. And I think we're at a point where the centre of gravity has moved now from not just having it as part of strategies, but actually shifting to thinking about how we do project delivery. And now that is one of the harder parts, because you need the policy frameworks, the grids, the financing to all come together to match the ambition. But we're observing those efforts to develop that, be it regulatory frameworks, project pipelines, and the conditions to satisfy investors to take the risk on these new projects in the region. We know from our own experience in the UK, it's not easy. Each one of those aspects is complex and it takes time. For us, it's been more than a 20-year journey. We had our first multi-turbine offshore wind project in the UK back in 2004. So you can see this hasn't been a quick transition to where we are now in the UK as the world's second largest offshore wind market. But we do see clear momentum. It was mentioned in the opening plenary, and also really pleased to see, for example, the auction that's happening in the Philippines now, a strong signal that the region is committed to delivery.
Good, okay, thank you. So, you already mentioned Director Fukuoka, but countries developing wind power also want to develop their supply chains, their industry. That is part of energy independence. We sometimes see a conflict between different objectives here. Accelerating the build-out often involves subsidies, measures to develop local supply chains, but also delivering competitively. It's that tension between delivery and pricing. But if we look at examples in Europe and APAC, how much of a challenge is this for achieving this balance? Shall I come back to you, Director Fukuoka?
Yes, yeah, it's a very important point. And of course, in the short time, building resilient supply chain and decreasing the price cost is has some tensions. However, in the mid and long term, we can make appropriate supply chain. We have solved the win-win relation between the cost and security. So that's a very important point.
Yeah, okay. Ambassador, perhaps you could comment on that from the Norwegian perspective and more generally.
Yeah, sure. There are always trade-offs when it comes to sort of efficiency versus speed sometimes. But as was mentioned earlier as well, some of the industries have a lot of things to build on. Like a lot of our offshore wind energy companies have a lot of experience from offshore oil and gas. I think that was mentioned by Dr. Tan as well. And if you have experience in building huge infrastructure projects already at sea, I mean, for us it's mostly offshore, you do have quite a bit of the infrastructure, you do have a lot of the suppliers that can easily then change from one to the other. What we have seen though, and this was mentioned in the introduction before we got on stage, Norway has both been a center of wind industry and also of opposition to wind industry. A lot of people don't want, they want windmills, but they don't want them in their backyards. So what we've found is that it's vitally important that the different localities see some concrete benefits, that the benefits aren't just for the grid as a whole or for society as a whole, but the various localities that are going to house these wind parks and these windmills actually see some tangible benefits from the build-up. And that's something I think that balance is still being worked on in Norway as in many other countries throughout the world.
As it surely is and will be here as well. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that we've seen, as I mentioned earlier, Europe and of course APAC countries, is a need to reset, perceptions of a need to reset auction terms to adjust to these headwinds. And yeah, so Mr. Fukuoka, it's very good to have you here to tell us a little bit about what's happening in Japan. It's one of the countries that people are watching closely at the moment. Can you tell us a little about the process that Japan is going through to reset terms right now and to relaunch round 1?
Oh, okay.
And of course, follow up with round 4. Can you give us some insight into the next policy steps on how to grow investment?
Yes, we improve our auction system drastically, actually. Our message is very clear. We would like to make an investable market in Japan. That's why we emphasize on the completion of investment and projects. We would like to have just a cheaper price. We don't want just a cheaper price. We would like to complete the project. That's why we implement in the auction, we set not only the ceiling price, but also the floor price.
Yes.
Appropriate pricing is very important, and making predictability for the developers. So this is our message in our auction improvement.
Okay. Can you give us some insight into the timing of the auction and, sorry.
Yeah. Not to dissatisfy.
Yeah, I'm just following up the question, I'm sorry. Could you give us a little bit of insight into the timing of the auction? I don't expect you to give us the secrets of your pricing intentions, but can you give us any idea of whether we will see the sort of ceiling price increasing significantly compared to previous auctions?
Yes, exactly. And we emphasize on the communication with developers and stakeholders, supply chain, turbine manufacturers. We have many discussions with these stakeholders, and we emphasize on the establishing the industrial base and building resilient supply chain. This is our point.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, for achieving these objectives, international cooperation can also play a role. How important is international cooperation for finding this right balance, if we can call it, between making build-out effective and efficient? So, Rhiannon, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of this links to the earlier question about supply chain trade-offs too, where I would say it doesn't have to be a binary choice. It can be a phased approach to how you implement and deploy offshore wind. Our experience in the UK, we wanted to prioritise speed of deployment and price early on. So that meant relying a lot on established global supply chains. But as we have developed our industry and the sector has grown, we've invested more in building local supply chain, giving more foresight of our pipeline through annual contract for difference auctions and so on. But in terms of sort of international cooperation more broadly, I think there's a couple of elements that are absolutely crucial. One being the sharing, the international learnings, harnessing that global experience. Summits like this, an excellent platform to do that, and the UK government's been collaborating with those nations in the region and with ASEAN in what it can learn from our own journey in the UK. But also I wanted to touch on coordination of grids and infrastructure, because that came up in the opening plenary and I think is a fundamental underpinning of growing the sector in Asia. I mean, the grid and transmission infrastructure is going to enable more efficient use of renewable resources, improve system balancing, and it provides a stronger investment case for large-scale projects. So things like the ASEAN power grid provide a foundation to moving towards a more integrated regional electricity system. I think what's been happening in the Middle East provides further impetus to that. The UK faced the similar challenge of the demand centres not necessarily always matching where the generation potential is. So for us, there's a lot of offshore wind deployed in Scotland and the northeast of England, but demand centres primarily being driven from the south of England. And so we've invested heavily in HVDC cables, subsea cables, to transport efficiently that electricity generation from the north of the country down to those demand centres. You can totally see that potential in ASEAN as well. We're very much looking forward to supporting the region on its ambitions on regional connectivity.
Okay. I'll come back to the sort of grid kind of cooperation, integration, and the supply chain matters. But you mentioned there also the sort of technical kind of cooperation. Now, Japan has a lot of very interesting international cooperation around technology. Here at this event, there's going to be, shortly there will be, or has just been, the signing of a new technology cooperation agreement between Singapore's Technology Centre for Offshore Marine and the floating offshore wind entity in Japan, FLORA, another example. But perhaps just tell us what, in policy terms, what does Japan intend to achieve from these kind of cooperation agreements it has?
Yeah, I consider that the international collaboration is critical to finish the offshore wind project successfully. So from the leading countries such as UK and Norway and Denmark, we learned a lot from these countries that auction system and policy measures, subsidies, nurturing industries, ecosystems. We learn a lot from these countries. And on the other hand, with Asia, we would like to make a regional supply chain in the Asia. So Singapore has expertise on the financing, maritime industries, and Japan has based on some automotive industry, manufacturing, heavy industries base. And any other countries has, in Asia has expertise. We would like to make a regional supply chain with, through the international collaboration, like from the Europe successful case, not only Denmark or Norway, UK, but also the French and German, and these regional collaborations necessary for the successful offshore wind project.
That's very interesting. That was actually more or less my next question. Within the sort of the realm of cooperation or alliances, this whole question of how to create the most efficiency in a supply chain. I mean, one example, these things can kind of happen organically as well as formally. There's a kind of, I guess there's a kind of East-West alliance developing over things like converter stations and substations where you see, for example, here in Singapore, important fabrication for European projects. Another example, Seatrium here in Singapore also uses yards in Indonesia, or another Singapore company, Cyan Renewables, uses yards in Vietnam, looking for, obviously, efficiencies. It brings a question, though. How can, you mentioned it from a Japanese perspective, but how can governments in Asia work together more effectively to stimulate a strong regional power industry? It's quite an ambitious thing to try to achieve, isn't it? Can we, I haven't spoken to, haven't addressed the ambassador for a while, but perhaps begin with you. If you've got some thoughts on that, please.
On Asia?
On the global.
On the global. Well, first of all, as was mentioned both by Rhiannon and by my German colleague, the North Sea, what we learned and what we are now in discussions with our Japanese friends is that, you know, once you basically share an ocean for offshore wind, there is no such thing as, or there is such a thing that, you know, my licenses and your licenses, but it helps the developers a lot if you have projects on both sides of the economic zones, so that, you know, you can build out infrastructure. One thing we found is if you allow a company to service installations both in separate economic zones, so that a service provider doesn't have to go from Scotland to a UK, then back to Scotland, and then we have to send out someone to service our installations, but the same service provider can actually provide services to both the UK, a German park, a Dutch wind park, and then a Norwegian wind park. And I'm sure similar things will be happening between Korea and Japan, for example. You have two very advanced economies with a lot of industrial bases, but if you sort of want to do everything yourself, you're going to increase the cost compared to if you allow some companies to utilize both Japan's and Korea's industrial bases, and then allows them to service and build out some of the infrastructure that can maybe service both markets. The same will be case in other areas. But of course, one thing that would be very helpful here in Asia would be the fact that if you can do the public agreements that are needed, for example, to lay subsea cables through each other's territory. I mean, a lot of talk about, green power from Sarawak, for example, coming to Johor in Singapore, but that cable has to run through Indonesian waters. So unless you get some of these agreements in place, it's going to be hard to realize some of the potential in Southeast Asia.
Okay. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree with your idea, Sarah, and that's a very good question. I consider that there is no that kind of framework to make overall optimization in the regions regarding the supply chains. Actually, every country would like to establish a nacelle base and blade manufacturing base and elegant port. However, that is not far from the overall optimization. Each country has expertise and specialties. So that's why we try to integrate these kind of expertise in the region. This is very important. We can have the same missions to decrease the cost for the offshore wind. We can see this, if we have the same, we can see the same direction on this matter. So that's why we are very keen on establishing that kind of framework to make overall optimizations.
Yeah. Rhiannon, I have quite a lot of questions and we're running out of time, but you were looking like you wanted to say that? No? Okay, good. Not good. But anyway, perhaps the biggest hope or most obvious example of potential Asian cooperation is in the area of cross-border grids. We've heard a little from Rhiannon about the ASEAN initiative. There does seem to be new impetus there. It seems to be caused by the problems in the Persian Gulf. And there was another initiative very recently. The Asia Development Bank said it would help mobilize 50 billion for energy and digital infrastructure. Very interesting. My question, I guess, is this an idea whose time has come? And I can't ask that question without asking you to talk about the challenges as well, because there are quite a lot of them. Rhiannon, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, so I've touched on this a bit already, and I think, as I say, I think what's happened in the Middle East does provide an impetus to regional energy security and resilience considerations where interconnection can play an important role, and actually not just around the region, but even domestically within markets. I know Indonesia, for example, is looking extensively at growing its cross-island interconnectors. The UK has very long-standing experience of this. In fact, I think the longest standing this year, we have the oldest interconnector in the world between the UK and France celebrating its 40th birthday. We also have the longest interconnector in the world, the Viking link. So, and we now have 10 interconnectors providing about 10 gigawatts capacity. And I think there can sometimes be nervousness about these international interconnectors, whether they'll flow the right way when you need them. But we have seen great examples of how actually demand peaks have been complementary between ourselves and our European neighbours that have really helped with balancing the grid, keeping prices down, and managing our grid stability. So that's been our positive experience. It's great to see ASEAN is also seeing those benefits. We're keen to support the work that we know is happening on the regulatory frameworks needed to enable it. We're also working via our contributions to the ADB through our funds, including the ASEAN Green Catalytic Finance Facility, to see how we can support, as well as I know our other development partners like British International Investments and our UK Export Finance Facility stand ready to assist.
That regulatory framework requires some regulating really complex issues like who gets priority, what do you do when there are shortages, building trust around that. But I mean, can I ask if you individually you feel optimistic that this is something that is going to happen in the region?
I think I'm optimistic that it will happen in the region, but that there will be stops and starts. There will be bumps in the road that you haven't foreseen. And I mean, political pressure is always a thing. In Norway, for example, it was very hard to say that we're going to have public subsidies for auctions for offshore wind and then have some of that power go to overseas markets, even though we're already very interconnected with both the UK and our other friends in Europe. To say that we're going to use public money to build something and then that isn't going to sort of benefit either solely or mostly domestic industry is a hard sell. So there will probably be parts of the ASEAN power grid that go smoother than we expect, and there will be other parts where there will be hiccups, whether it's with regional governments or between governments. It's hard to say, but these developments are rarely go in a straight line.
Director Fukuoka, in Japan, is there a belief in this initiative?
Yes, I'm also very optimistic on these matters, and ADB's strong initiative is very, very supportive for the development of the offshore wind in Asia regions.
Yeah.
And this is in line with the ASEAN Japan's initiative, AZEC, Asia Zero Emission Committee initiative, in line with this policy. So Japan would like to support to complete this project by some public financing or subsidy measures.
Okay. Okay, well, I can't let this panel end without asking you, again, Director Fukuoka, about Japan's intentions and the supply chain. Can you just tell us a little bit about we've talked about how focusing on an efficient supply chain. What are Japan's priorities in building the supply chain for offshore wind? And particularly, I'd like to know how Japan views its access to competitively priced wind turbines. Are you likely to follow a Korean kind of path of licensing the assembly of European turbines? Are you determined to have a Japanese turbine manufacturer in the future, or are you agnostic? What does Japan want?
Yes, thank you for your comment. We are enhancing on the collaboration with the global turbine manufacturers. Our main target is establishing resilient turbine supply chain actuaries. METI made MOC with Vestas and Siemens to build a resilient supply chain. And in last month, two months ago, METI has made a new MOC with Vestas to collaborate nacelle full nacelle assembly factory to make a nacelle full assembly by the end of 2039 or so. We would like to seek for their establishing the full nacelle assembly, and based on that, attracting investment from the global turbine manufacturers, and we will nurture the suppliers for these global turbine manufacturers. This is a key point. And we would like to make more supply chain regionally. However, we would like to be the hub of the turbine manufacturing in Asia.
Okay, thank you. All right. So, getting towards the end here, in wind, we often like to talk about Asia learning from Europe, Europe advancing, being very advanced in wind. But crisis tends to drive innovation, and Asia is good at that. So who thinks, what do we think that Asia can bring that's new to the game? Perhaps we can think about the future role of Singapore within that question. So if it helps, perhaps we can also think about some of the things that Europe has brought to the picture. So Rhiannon?
Yeah, happy to kick off on that one. So might start with some of the learnings from the UK, because it's been, as I said, a sort of 20-year journey for us. And I wouldn't say when it comes to learnings that it's about a copy-paste model from what other countries have done, but it's about taking the experiences and being able to leapfrog those to apply them to your unique market and to provide the certainty that is needed for investment. And that's one of the things I particularly wanted to highlight around certainty of revenue and offtake. Earlier in my career, actually, when I worked in the now DESNZ UK department, played a small role as bill manager for what's now the UK's Energy Act 2013 that set the primary legislative framework for our contracts for difference regime. And that is the mechanism where through by auctions we provide long-term certainty of revenue and reduce the cost of capital to give investors the confidence to make those long-term investments, because these are multi-decade projects with a large upfront capital-intensive starting point. So that kind of mechanism is the kind of things that I think this region should be thinking about, and I know is thinking about. But we've also had our bumps in the road along the way that can be taken into account. For example, in our Contracts for Difference auction round 5 back in 2023, we realised the bidding cap was set too low when there are actually no bids for that auction round. So that's something that we have learnt from. We then widely consulted business, raised the cap for auction round 6. So there are these learnings out there, and having that long-term revenue certainty is key. I mean, in this region, so we went through the early stage of offshore wind fixed bottom. There was mention in the opening plenary to floating offshore wind. I think that's really exciting in this region, particularly given the deep sea beds around many of the places of high wind potential, Japan, Philippines, Korea. So that feels like an area that the region could really drive innovation for the future. The UK is keen to work with the region on that.
Okay. Yes, please.
Yes, I fully agree with her idea that key driver regarding innovation, the key driver is floating. Because Asia has a unique character on the steep seabed, lightning, and typhoon, and some special conditions. And regarding the floating, this can be the game changers. And Singapore has a maritime industry, and they can make excellent foundations for the floating. We have to make R&D. We can collaboratively make implement the R&D project in the severe situations demonstration project in the lightning and the typhoon also. And this will be the good point for the innovations in the Asia.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Perhaps to draw things to a close, we began by looking at the momentum for wind in Asia, Asia Pacific. Perhaps just a final reflection on what kind of energy system we should actually be aiming for. A few years ago, it was very, very focused on the idea of a complete energy transition and decarbonisation. But I don't know, maybe we've learned to look for diversification where oil and gas does have a role to play, and we should accept that, etc. But I think I'm going to ask my Norwegian ambassador, His Excellency, do you perhaps comment on the kind of energy system that we should be aiming for?
I think you're going to have to be looking for, not just electrons, but different types of molecules. I mean, some of the projects that are talked about here in Asia, you could build a cable from Australia to Singapore. That's much, much, much longer than any cable that's ever been built. Or you can transform those electrons in Australia, whether from wind or sun or from Japan, and maybe turn them into molecules that can then be harnessed in other parts of Asia. So I think there will be a multi-solution story to this. And as Director Fukuoka-san mentioned, I mean, Singapore, both with financing, with its excellent engineering capabilities, Citrium is one of the companies I think I've gotten to know best during my years here, has a definite role to play, even though Singapore will not be a hub for energy generation, but will definitely be a vital hub for finding the solutions necessary for this multiple solution world that we'll be entering.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think that draws us to a close. I'd like to thank the members of the panel here for a good discussion. Thank you very much. And you can leave the stage, and I will invite my next panelist. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Alex, get some water, please. Water. Get me some water, please.
Okay, thank you. So, we are now going to have our first Leadership Spotlight interview. And so I'd like to call to the stage Mr. Yi Hua Lu, who is a partner with Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. Thank you. this one on first.
Hi.
Hello.
Which one?
Another water. Okay.
It's a bit of an awkward depth, this one.
Good if you need to sleep. Okay. So, I'm very pleased to have with me here Mr. Yi Hua Lu.
Yep, nice to be here.
Nice to meet you. Could you begin by, I'm sure everyone in this room is pretty familiar with CIP, but could you begin by just giving us a short introduction to Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, please, and particularly as relates to wind?
Sure. So CIP is founded in 2012, and since then we've evolved to be probably the biggest niche energy transition funds manager in the world. So we manage 37 billion euros, and all of that fund is committed to various different funds focused on energy transition. I think also we have quite a strong industrial builders background. So all the founders, the 4 founding partners, have come out of industrial backgrounds. So we like to consider ourselves a specialist in greenfield, but with a big funds management and fundraising role. And historically, we've always invested in large projects, and in particular, large offshore wind projects. So in the APAC region, we're one of the largest developers with operating offshore wind assets, for example, both in Taiwan and in Korea. And then globally, a lot of offshore wind footprint, as well as onshore and other types of renewables. So I think a lot of people know us from the offshore wind heritage, but these days our portfolio is fairly evenly split between about a third globally offshore wind, a third onshore, so PV and onshore wind, and then a third other technologies in energy transition.
Your projects in Taiwan have been very interesting. They've kind of served a little bit as a bellwether for the opportunities and the challenges for the region, for the industry in this region. And I think Taiwan has become quite a core APAC market for CIP. Could you tell us a little bit about the path of the Fengmiao wind farm and why it was so important for so many reasons, particularly in terms of achieving the sort of corporate offtake in the circumstances that it did?
Yeah, sure. So Fengmiao offshore wind farm reached financial close in, I think, March 2025. And it is, to date, the only what's called round 3 project to reach financial close. So in Taiwan, earlier round 1s and 2s were mostly feed-in tariff-based projects, and round 3 was the first round where it was fully based on CPPAs. I think the stats are that we have a financing club of over 30 financial institutions. I think it's 27 banks, 4 ECAs, and the Taiwanese local ECA, if you can call it that. We have a pretty localized supply chain, which we're very proud of. And importantly, we club together 6 different off-takers with corporate PPAs as long as 30 years, which is well longer than the traditional 20-year Taipower PPA. So I think it's really set an interesting mark for that market. Number one, being able to reach financial close with a fully CPPA-backed deal. And I think number 2, sort of powering through the various headwinds that we're experiencing to still be able to reach financial close. And that demonstrates kind of a robustness of that Taiwanese offshore wind market.
The headwinds you mentioned, obviously international headwinds, but was there quite a learning process on the Taiwan side too? Are these projects that kind of helped change things from the way the sector is viewed in Taiwan?
I think Taiwan is a very good market and a good example of how new offshore wind markets evolve. So the challenges that we faced and overcame on Fengmiao are perhaps typical new market issues, right? So a supply chain that has a good industrial basis, and I think one of the earlier speakers was talking about, oil and gas players pivoting to offshore wind. So I think locally it's something similar. They've built a large, so for example, Century Wind, the foundations partner, they've built large steel structures before. They haven't necessarily built offshore wind jackets before. And so there's an element of a challenge of just getting the local supply chain who has some kind of relevant background to fully up to speed to deliver what we need. I think there's a lot of other new market risks, things like soil risk, weather. We simply don't have detailed data that in established markets like the North Sea, you have decades and decades of data, and so you're working with imperfect information. You do the best engineering that you can, but then once you start building things, there are technical issues that just pop up, and you have to deal with it in a pragmatic way. So I think those your question was about challenges, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about local content, the localization, etc.
Yeah, localization. I mean, on the whole, as CIP, we're very keen to work with all of the localizations that's required. I think we recognize that these offshore wind projects are so large that there is an element of the industrial strategy of the market that we want to help materialize. So it's not just about us as developers building projects, it's also about the industrial strategy and the economic flow on. But I think it requires a pretty collaborative effort between the developer and the supply chain, because even though they're very willing and they have good competencies, it'll be the first time they do many things that we ask them to do.
Were there lessons to be learned there? I guess this was the point of my question as well, to be honest, but were there lessons to be learned there for other APAC nations?
Yeah, so zooming out, if I can just expand the question a bit, what are the good lessons to be learned, not just for the Fengmiao project, because if I take a step back, we have 900 megawatts of projects now that's reached COD in Taiwan, so Changfang, Xidao, and Zhongneng, and then Fengmiao is currently in construction, so altogether 1.4 gigawatts operating and in construction, and then we have Fengmiao 2 in development. So it's not just that one project, it's all of the lessons learned.
Yeah.
I would say one is, as the market designer or as the government institution, setting a pretty clear cadence of auctions and very clear ambitions of total megawatts or gigawatts that's achievable, and then sticking to it. I think sometimes you see either very, very optimistic targets that we know won't be met, or chopping and changing, having a target and then going back. And so you need consistency for the supply chain to be able to invest into the manufacturing capabilities, but also consistency so developers like ourselves will make the investment to be in that market. So I think that's one. I think the second one is having a rational discussion about which of the priorities you have. I mean, there's the industrial strategy about localization, there's lowest cost of energy, there's speed of delivery of projects, and it's a bit of a trilemma. You can't have them all. You've got to pick which battles you want. Do you want cheapest energy as fast as possible, or do you want to grow your local supply chain? So I think what we've seen is, at least at the start, the Taiwanese authorities were quite pragmatic and open about that. Maybe another lesson would be inevitably, talking about the 1.4 gigawatts, the 900 megawatts in operations and now 400 in construction. We've bridged in the middle of that a COVID crisis, and then the start of the war in Ukraine, and now start of the Middle East tension. So there's been a lot of unforeseen circumstances, and what we as developers would like is the government to react to that. Because when you sign up to a project, you sign up to a bunch of dates, you sign up to a bunch of commitments, you make your best effort, and then the world changes. And for projects to continue to be developed and not to become a founded project or a stuck project, I think some degree of flexibility or pragmatism from the government to deal with new world events, I think that's very important. Now, to balance that, of course, we know also from the developer side that you can't do a bait and switch, right? So it'll be not very great for a market if governments are too relaxed, and that just encourages people to bid on one basis and then change their mind and weasel their way out of it later. So I think it's getting that balance right. If you're too rigid, new events happen and then developers can't go forward. If you're too too flexible, then maybe people take advantage of that.
Okay. And you're going forward with Fengmiao 2?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that the system there of the sort of 70 megawatt, I believe it is, floor price complement the sort of hybrid system with power purchase agreement and floor price? Is that something that's working well?
Well, I mean, we'll be developing Fengmiao 2 on the same basis for Fengmiao 1, which is fully corporate PPA backed.
Okay.
And from everything we can see, the corporate PPA market is still there, and in fact is probably stronger now than...
Yeah, sorry, I got the question a bit confused there.
No worries.
Okay. South Korea. I was very impressed with the sort of aggressiveness of the bidding the other week, the offers that were submitted. Now, the Haisong offshore projects, it seems to have matured significantly. You've got a grid connection in place, local turbine assembly agreements.
Right.
Okay. Tell us about that maturing process and what the turbine side of things, etc.
Yeah, so I'm sure everyone knows last week was the Korean PPA auction, so we submitted about 2 gigawatts of projects in total, about a gigawatt of bottom fixed, the Hesson projects, and about a gigawatt of floating, so the Hauri projects. And you're right, Hesson we've been developing for many years now, and at the point of submission, we have a PSA signed with Siemens that has a Doosan localization, so nacelle assembly component, and then the rest of the supply chain is actually pretty fully localized, from foundations to cables to installation vessels. How has it progressed? I would say there's part of it is just normal development, so you just got to get on and do the permitting. You got to apply for the grid connection, since as you say, we have a grid connection offer, and we have all those things. Part of it is just a big part of it is local stakeholder engagement. And I think a large part of it is also working with the supply chain. I think helpfully in Korea, they were already providing either regionally, globally, a lot of the components for offshore wind. So it wasn't necessarily a huge pivot. I mean, if anything, it's just emphasize what the existing strengths are.
You feel confident this is going to go through? Are there any question marks about, for example, the turbine certification, that side of things? Is it?
No, not really.
No. No. Okay. You also bid for floating capacity, and a lot of big companies, for different reasons, have pulled back a little bit from Korea in that sense. Tell us about your thinking there.
As an institution, CIP has invested a lot in floating. So I would say we have some USP in terms of the foundations and the technical understanding of it. I think if there's any market in the world today that could support commercial scale floating, it would be South Korea, right? Along with UK. So we have about 100 megawatt floating project that has a CFD award in the UK, and then we're hoping to get 400-500 megawatts allocated here. I think it's just a uniqueness of the government wanting energy security, wanting diversified sources, so as well as bottom fixed. They want to support some floating, and then the industrial capability to actually do it with the shipbuilding heritage. So what I say, floating is not a Swiss Army knife. You wouldn't build floating everywhere, so only in some markets would it make sense, and here in South Korea we think it does make sense. Okay, good. Okay, we're running out of time already. Anything final remark that you would like to make to leave with the audience? Well, I mean, I would say the current probably geopolitical environment is quite helpful for all of us who are in the energy transition. We get this question a lot from LPs and from others, right? How's the world changed? So I'd say one thing is, maybe not surprisingly, the big change would have happened after the war in Ukraine. So I think there was already a big push for energy transition acceleration, but from the perspective of energy security after 2022. So this time around, I would say maybe comfortingly, if you look around the various energy markets, power prices have actually not gone up as much as you'd think, because in markets where there's high renewables penetration or high battery penetration, it's taken out a lot of that spike that could have been caused by gas-backed power markets. I think that's one. And then secondly, it's maybe more of the same of energy policies. So South Korea, as a good example, was already very committed to reducing its reliance. It's about 80 or 90% reliant on imported fuels, so is Japan. So they were already very well down that track, and this recent event has just re-emphasized that. But we haven't seen any knee-jerk reactions. We haven't seen any backflipping from that policy. So it's really more of the same. So I would say in the short term there are some disruptions. We have a piece of very specialized kit, for example, for our project that had to make the passage through the Straits of Hormuz. So there was a whole lot of work we had to do to make sure, how do we get that piece of kit out? So there's a little bit of that, but I think in general it's actually a good geopolitical backdrop for us to continue on energy transition, because it emphasizes more than ever that you need more of this. Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much. We have 15 minutes slot, unless I'm making a big mistake, but we do, so. Thank you. All right, well, thank you. Thank you. I think we have a coffee break now, right? No? We don't. Sorry. Am I introducing someone? You are.
Thank you. There will be a lunch break in no time. Next issue on the agenda is how are the industry pioneers redefining the future of wind worldwide? That's the theme of the next panel, and I'd like to welcome on stage Parag Sharma, President of WIPA, Yuchudo Joy, Principal Investment Specialist of the Asian Development Bank, Eduardo Prina, CEO Asia Pacific Onshore of Siemens Gamesa, Tim Fisher, Global Executive Director of Rambøll, and Dennis Rentschmidt, Managing Director of VDMA Power Systems. Please take your seats, preferably roughly under your own photo. Oui. Okay. Yep, that's good. Thank you, and welcome to you all. I'd like to start with Mr. Sharma. India was the second largest wind power market in the world last year after China, and roughly on par with the US, adding 6 gigawatts. What's the reason? What's the secret?
So I would say there are a couple of points. One is that in 2023, India came out with bids as high as 51 gigawatts. Next year in 2024, it was 71 gigawatts. And substantial portion of these utility bids were for wind. So because of the high volumes of bids for power procurement coming out of utility, after 2 or 3 years, we see a good amount of deployment in the wind sector. But having said, that's just one of the points. The second point is that there's a huge demand of private PPAs now in India. So the data centers are moving to India. They require huge power. And they're looking at round-the-clock power, which require the mix of solar and wind. And I think the core reason for India pushing wind, because we have done too much solar now. In the solar hours, the morning 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., sometimes the merchant pricing is almost zero because there's so much surplus solar in the grid. While in the wind, typically in India, it is seen that 45% of the power generated is in the off-peak season. So utilities are pushing, and so are private PPAs, for more and more wind power procurement, because that is which is balancing the grid. And as we see, there is a 26 gigawatt of onshore wind projects which are under construction. So there's a huge pipeline. And I will not be surprised if this number in next couple of years moves to almost 10 gigawatt a year. So onshore wind industry in India is doing pretty well.
And is it possible to take that sort of growth to offshore as well? Because India today is mostly an onshore market.
So somehow India has been trying to launch an offshore wind policy. It's not been successful. One of the core reasons is that we are not so much rich in wind resources in offshore. And if I just take a number, the tariff of offshore wind might be 5 times more than a solar tariff. So that's one reason. The basic economics doesn't work so much. The second reason is that whenever Indian government tried launching offshore wind program, the sizes of viability gap funding was only for 1 gigawatt, 1.5 gigawatt. I believe if you have to really give a decent push to this sector, it has to be a large size policy which pushes people to do local manufacturing, reduce the cost, reduce the tariffs. So that level of effort hopefully will come from Indian government one day. As such, India has a large onshore, and there's a big potential, big possibility. But somehow, by now, policies have really not clicked in.
Mr. Joy, India, clearly a growing wind market. How would you assess the situation in other Asian markets that you work in?
Yeah, thank you. So I cover Southeast Asia, and it's good to hear the success story from India. Now, we have seen a few success stories like monsoon wind projects that we financed in Laos, selling to Vietnam. But I think, comparatively speaking, as my peer panelist mentioned, solar has been the lower hanging fruit because it's kind of less capital intensive and faster implementation. Technology is a bit simpler because you don't have the kind of rotating structures. Solar irradiation risks are comparatively easier to assess, than wind resource. But as sort of solar market becomes saturated, I think the wind is the next kind of lower hanging fruit. Now, within that sentiment, I think within Southeast Asia, Vietnam has been doing slightly better than some of the other sort of peer countries, and it's interesting how they did it. They basically offered high feed-in tariff for a few years, and the design was quite smart in the sense that they tied the amount of feed-in tariff to the timing of the COD, and so basically that kind of made people rush to get those feed-in tariff. Now, to be honest, PPAs in Vietnam are kind of known for not suitable for pure non-recourse financing, but it didn't matter because of the high feed-in tariff. People basically came in and built. They basically said, financing or bankability, I'll worry about that later. I'm not saying that is right or wrong, but it is a business model that worked in terms of implementation of the project. Now, towards the other end of the spectrum is kind of stick to a bankability proven PPA, and on that basis make the private sector compete on a level playing field, right? And that's the model that countries like Thailand and Malaysia have been sort of using in the solar bit. Now those countries somehow are behind in terms of wind, but so what that means is you have various kind of business model to proliferate wind and maybe other sort of renewable energy projects, but you can't be stuck in the middle. You can't have low or modest tariff while sort of PPA is marginally bankable or non-bankable. So that's kind of the market the way we see it in other Asian countries.
Does that mean that the functioning model is becoming clearer? What is the functioning model in the sense, or the sort of, as you say, you can't be stuck in the middle? Do you see also the players understanding that, in the sense that you can't be stuck in that middle?
Yeah, I think the result is clear that for those countries where they've deployed one of those sort of models towards the both ends of the spectrum, they have delivered. And where it's slightly lagging behind. For example, I'm not kind of trying to to sort of shed light on the dark side, but for example, Indonesia, of course, multiple sort of factors are at play. Indonesia, at least the on land, onshore side, the wind resource is not that great, but still, I mean, it has some potential. But within the country, the wind installed capacity at this moment is less than 200 megawatt. And Indonesia tends to kind of play around with the risk allocation of the PPA and the regulation, related regulations, while capping the PPA tariff at with a regulation quite arbitrarily. I mean, they used to kind of tie it to the regional average generation cost. Now they kind of changed it to like a ceiling or a band. But clearly there's a difference between the countries that has been sort of successful and those that haven't been.
Thank you. Mr. Fischer, I think if I read correctly, that you have around 1,000 people in Ramboll working with wind worldwide. How would you assess the current state of affairs in the various Asian markets, strong points and weak points?
I think we have heard a lot about onshore now. I mean, we're also covering onshore. Onshore, I think, is a fairly stable business as we see it in Asia globally. I mean, price-wise, it's unbeatable in combination with solar battery storage. Very, very, I think, fluid market. But we're also in offshore across Asia, but also across the world with more than 20 different offices in countries. And I think it's fair to say that offshore wind is in a major transition. I wouldn't call it a crisis, but offshore wind, the sector is in a very difficult position from really times of low investment costs to now a complete change of the industry. I think we have seen a major impact by oil and gas majors. I would say almost negatively impacting the market by entering the industry with way too high prices, and now they're exiting it again. So offshore wind is in a very difficult spot. However, I think we see positive signs globally, but also in Asia. Governments are reacting to the conditions. We see governments changing auction designs. I think we also see in the offshore sector a more local business. I think that, in my opinion, offshore wind for the next years won't be, in most countries, a market where you can make good returns as an investor, at least not in every country. So we see more local players stepping up that have also local reasons for doing offshore wind, because they have maybe local offtake, other local reasons, local PPAs. So the whole sector is somewhat changing. I mean, maybe in Korea and Asia, we have seen years back a lot of European developers. Now we see more and more local companies stepping in. And I think that is also a transition we are seeing in the market, which of course brings opportunities, but also again new challenges, because most of these players are fairly new to offshore wind. So we have to see how can we also help that transition for all these new players now entering the market. I think overall we will still see, probably depends of course where you are in the value chain, but I think the next year or two will still be quite tough. I mean, we have now, of course, Japan is re-tendering round one. We have round two, maybe with repricing. We have Korea resetting up things. We have maybe soon with Philippines a new player in the market. So things are moving, but it will take some time. And interestingly, offshore wind has also for many years, and I mean, I know you're not covering offshore, but let's see what Siemens says. I think offshore wind also has interestingly always been up and down on the supply chains. We had many years of lack of too little suppliers. Now we actually are a bit low on the market. I actually foresee that very soon, again, we are talking about lack of turbines, we talk about lack of DC components, and that is also something we as an industry have to solve and find a solution to, and that means we probably also need more suppliers, more local suppliers into the mix, that we're not in a year or year and a half talk, okay, now projects are progressing, but we don't have enough components, because I'm actually foreseeing this for 2027 again. So I think offshore is in a major transition, but APAC has, I think, a fantastic platform to deal with offshore. I think there's a lot of skills and capabilities in the region available, and I think if we mix the countries in the right way against the capabilities, I think that can be a very strong region in offshore wind. And actually, we see Asia for the next 5 years as a major growth region worldwide.
Mr. Rentschmidt, VDMA Power Systems, they are, I think, the largest European association for the machinery industry, and you are responsible for manufacturers and suppliers of power-related machinery and plant engineering. How do you see the current situation?
Yeah, as you say, we are representing the largest industry association all over Europe, representing more than 3,500 companies. Well, Germany is not only the biggest market in Europe. We permitted more than 10 gigawatts at work. More than 10 gigawatts last year and this year only for the German market. But it's also a large hub for the supply chain. Is it working properly? Get a bit feedback. So we're also having the largest supply chain hub in Germany and neighboring countries. So while we are looking at Asia Pacific as the manufacturers and the suppliers, it's, as Tim already said, it's a promising market. It's the first thing. So we would like to highlight our expertise and also our reliability as companies from the supply chain and from the manufacturing side to potential developers and potential operators here in the APEC region. I'm not quite on Tim, on your side when it comes to the question of will we be short of production capacities, because we're rather seeing that production capacity is still not completely covered, at least from the European standpoint, and we're rather looking for more volumes. So actually, for instance, when we're addressing politicians and in Europe, in European countries, we're asking them to be more reliable on the volume side and giving more projects into the supply chain. And that is one of the reasons why we're also, as hardware suppliers, more addressing the APEC region, because we are looking for more volumes and we're looking for new markets to develop and also to tackle in order to make sure that our supply chain, our production capacity is exploited fully. So the main reason
I think we need a new
I think we need a new mic
here.
or a handheld mic maybe.
Yeah.
So let me maybe just add one more aspect. I would say the expertise.
I'll give this one.
Thank you very much. The expertise suppliers and manufacturers from the European supply chain are bringing into this market is horrendous, and they are kind of trying to make a different pitch than some other regions of the world. Let's say, for instance, Asian-based manufacturers. The market is tremendous, and we heard from IEA that there are 340 gigawatts actually needed to fulfill the 1.5 climate target. Are we there? Not at all. We're just doing globally maybe half of it, but 75% of it is coming from China. So I totally agree there's a lot of potential which should be developed, which should be tapped. And what we're trying to say is the European supply chain is a very reliable one. It's the industry is quite mature. We've experienced for the last couple of decades, like 40 years of expertise, and we have trustworthy suppliers. So these suppliers coming from the Western Hemisphere, let's say, are really trustworthy and reliable, and that is our pitch here in the Asia-Pacific region.
Thank you. Mr. Prina, as VP of Asia-Pacific onshore at Siemens Energy Wind Power, maybe you can answer the question that come up here now. Sort of, do you have the capacity to deliver the turbines onshore at least?
But yes, thanks for the question, and also thanks for us being here and for the organization of this event. Good from time to time not to travel since I'm based in Singapore, so that's a great one. So yes, I mean, when we look at Asia Pacific, we have been in the market for the last more than 20 years. Actually, we have been pioneering in the wind industry onshore in many markets in Asia Pacific, and of course, the Siemens Energy, obviously, much longer than that. I think we celebrated 110 years in Australia some weeks ago. So obviously, we are well rooted in all these markets, and we also have strong local competencies. And obviously, Asia Pacific is not a one fit for all. The differences in this geography are large, but of course, there are some common trends. And I have to say, I agree with what Tim mentioned about onshore being stable. So what we've seen in the last years, in fact, there is stability on the onshore side, which actually answers already your question about manufacturing. And of course, if you know, from an OEM point of view, it's extremely relevant, the stability on the manufacturing footprint. But I have to say, in recent times, I also read a recent report from Wood Mackenzie on the last quarter trends. What we expect what this report shows in the next 3 years is quite a drastic reduction compared to the targets by 2030. So almost 5 gigawatts less in certain geographies, compensated by the growth of India. And of course, there are several reasons behind it, but when it comes to an OEM point of view, what matters is execution. is clearly a priority and a driver for many other aspects. So that is an element which is connected with every geography has a different reason behind. There are some common threads about it, but obviously it's something we need to tackle, or what has to be tackled, to still maintain this onshore stability that we have seen in the region, which is, by the way, sustainable onshore stability, I have to say.
We spoke beforehand, and you mentioned, I noted down that you mentioned a need for speeding up. Could you elaborate a bit on that and share your views on that?
Yes, there has been in the last few years, in certain geographies, of course, very important legislations that have, or let's say frameworks that have been set. And of course, this gave clarity over the long term. This was actually 2020, and for instance, in countries like Japan, this gave a good long-term view until 2030 of what to expect out of the market with a solid remuneration scheme. And of course, this is under review now. But this is really something that everyone obviously look into, potentially waits for, to get back, to extend the view beyond 2030, which is very relevant. It's 2026, 27 almost, and 2030 really is already a short-term view. So definitely this is something awaited. On the other side, when you look at other geographies on the southern hemisphere, there is a lot of backlog of volumes. There is a good transparency on the project side, but very few projects are reaching financial investment. And this backlog obviously is constraining new projects and new initiatives. So it's important to unlock and unleash this potential. I have to say there are also very good examples. New Zealand is actually a good one. They're already running 90% from renewables in their own consumption. But of course, they want to go beyond. And recently, they've launched a fast-track system for permitting, which actually works, is working. So we have seen already a first project after 1 year achieving consent, which was not really something that was happening in the past. So I can see countries like New Zealand, where we have almost 50% of market share on the wind side, is progressing well.
Mr. Joy, just picking up on what Mr. Prina said there about the financial constraints, does that ring a bell for you when he paints a picture like this? Do you see the same issue with the different mechanisms in different countries?
Yeah, the way I see it is that there's no shortage of financing. There's shortage of bankable projects. And when it comes to Southeast Asia, they tend to kind of have unstable kind of regulatory framework, and they keep on changing the PPA risk allocation. And as my fellow countryman Fukuda-san this morning was saying, he mentioned the keyword predictability. What we as financiers, and I'm sure for investors as well, we are looking for predictability in terms of cash flow, in terms of investment return. Of course, not everything can be perfectly kind of predicted, but some sort of level of confidence in terms of the likelihood of returns and cash flows. That's the key. And sometimes you don't have that. And sort of coming to one specific issue that I sort of recently encountered in the offshore Philippines offshore sector is that they don't have the port to support the construction work and sort of management or operation and management. And so ADB basically supported the Philippines government on the development of the port. Yes, financially and also supporting infrastructure, we are doing what we can as ADB. But yeah, so that's kind of the way we see it. Yeah.
So do you then need sort of more mature frameworks in a sense, that because you should have a port really when you come to you with a project? Is there some kind of maturity needed here, or?
Yeah. So I mean, these IPP financing, it's not new. It's been done for the last 2-3 decades. I guess it's partly our job to kind of, instill and basically define what bankable PPAs are. But it's been a long journey, and hopefully we are getting there. And in fact, Philippines offshore, I personally was very involved in sort of having dialogue with DOE to design the TOR of GR Round 5 to really make it bankable. Because the original sort of draft, there were some big bankability holes, and I think we've sort of managed to fix it. So that's kind of, we want to fix it. I think we have been fixing it in certain circumstances, in certain countries. And hopefully that'll sort of accelerate the development.
Mr. Sharma, on, of course, the Indian market the most, but what kind of framework improvements or regulatory improvements do you think is necessary to speed things up?
Yeah, so first of all, India has done pretty well on regulatory framework in the last 10 years. We have been following tariff-based competitive bidding, and there is a standard bidding documents which are followed by each and every distribution licensee in India. And all these PPAs and the other bidding documents have a very balanced risk matrix. And we have got now a reputation in the world. You name any private equity, they will be doing third or fourth renewable platform of theirs in India. You talk about KKR, it is their third or fourth, Actis, EQT, Partners Group. So all the private equity players are there. And these PPAs are so balanced that all the foreign banks are very comfortable financing the same, obviously including ADB, SMBC, Mizuho Bank, all the banks are also there. So that's the first and the foremost. The bidding documents, the way it is being done, there is a decent amount of stability in that market. Now, over the last 1 year, what India also intelligently did, that they made 70% of manufacturing should have a domestic content. So they smartly introduced regulatory changes. So it's not that India was not having decent amount of manufacturing of wind turbines. They were having almost 50% plus. But yes, the recent regulations are pushing it to 70% plus. So all the 5 or 6 components have to be manufactured in India. And what they did is they reduced the GST, the taxes, from 12 to 5%. And whatever was the shock because of this got compensated in lieu of the same. So the turbine prices almost remain the same, and they cleverly moved the value chain to India. So it's been a good track record. It's working well. There is a regulatory stability, and people are investing in India.
We had a tender in South Korea where there were 9 bids, was announced on Friday. My colleague Gareth referred to it earlier today. And we could see a number of different companies involved, of course, different standards and different sizes. And it seems to me that there's been this race for size, particularly maybe offshore, that's made it very hard to get costs down and a sort of the discussion between getting it big enough but also being able to do it in producing in scale. I don't know, Mr. Renschmidt, there's been this continuous drive for innovation, including the bigger turbines. Is that just something, a development the offshore industry has to go through? But are we reaching a point where it's sort of, we should stop the scale hunt and go for in size-wise and go for scale in being able to actually produce a lot more turbines?
Well, first of all, I would say scales always matters because it brings down costs in the first place, but it's not only an offshore matter, it's onshore also relevant. I would like to stress what we already heard. It's not a matter of financing issues. It's not a matter of technology, so the technology is mature. It's not a matter of production capacities. It's really a matter of two things. Policy framework, we talked about that already. And the second thing is scaling supply chain. Scaling supply chain is, let's say, particularly a problem in Europe because we have fragmented markets. So every member state is doing their own standards, permits, whatever. So that makes it hard for manufacturers and suppliers to bring scale into their supply chains because obviously the prerequisites and the demand is so different from the different developers and operators. So yes, we will need to have more harmonization between countries. We will have to have more and larger projects to come into this scale and to bring down cost. And we're seeing very good progress on that, and we're seeing very good first projects. For instance, we've just developed the first, you have to imagine that, after 40 years, we've developed the first project in Europe that is going between two nations, between Denmark and Germany. So we just developed a new project. It's called Bornholm project. It's on the island of Bornholm. And this is the first project after 40 years where two countries are partnering and doing a project together. And the idea behind it is also scale. So we need to have more projects. We need to have larger projects to be competitive, to bring down the cost, and to be more an industrialized industry. So going back from handcrafted products more into industrialization. And that is only possible if we get more harmonized standards, more harmonized technical prerequisites like that. You're asking, is the race towards height, so that means size, ever stopping? I don't think so. Because there are some limitations to it. They're coming mainly from the transportation side, I would say. So bringing the products to the site might be a limitation when it comes to size, but it's always better to be bigger, to build bigger, because it always brings down cost on the production side. So I don't think that we see a stop of this rise.
Mr. Fischer, do you think that, because we're mentioning now, for instance, it took 40 years for two European countries to cooperate on this, and it's only in the last year we've seen successful tenders in Europe again after a series of failures really on offshore. Are there some of the mistakes made in Europe that could be sort of learning points for other markets as well, sort of, to avoid falling into the same traps, or?
I don't want to be the critical voice here on the panel. I really like offshore wind, just to make clear. I wouldn't sign it off that we have been tremendously successful in Europe across all countries. Personally, I'm a big fan of de-risk centralized auction schemes like we have in the Netherlands. They give you a lot of certainty, they de-risk your project, and in particular the time to FID is fairly short, and that is a big issue we have in many countries, that we have too much time between you're getting the project until you actually get FID. And if you just look at the amount of projects that have reached FID in offshore wind the past year or two, outside of China, it's less than a handful probably. So have all these auctions been so successful? I don't know. As a German, I can say this. In Germany, may say we had successful auctions recently, but if you open the news today, it will say that these projects, developers are thinking about giving back the projects. So I think we have to. I just listened to the discussion. It's a very difficult one. How big should projects be? If they're too big, you're also depending on too few big players. If they're too small, you're lacking the scale. Again, I think de-risking project is most important, and in my view, in the future, this can be done by centralizing auctions, pre-developing sites. I think the elephant in the room is that we are sitting globally on a huge pool of projects that are fairly far developed, but they're all lacking a business case. So we can talk a lot about now new auction designs that will help the future, but there's a huge amount of projects sitting worldwide without business case at the moment. And for me, this is a huge opportunity where we need to find a solution to particularly when we look at the Middle East crisis now, where everyone talks about we need to accelerate renewables. What can we do pragmatically as governments to reactivate those projects? I mean, we have in Germany projects, that may not have a business case. So what can we do as a government? I know that Japan is discussing how can we restart around 2 projects. So I think one thing is looking in the future. I think the other one is what can we do with, I think, a huge amount of projects that is currently sitting there in this middle between current execution and the future of new auctions. And I think that is also something where we as an industry need to find a pragmatic way to solve it. It's not easy. We had this in the United States. Maybe not everyone followed that, but many years back in the US, New York has reopened a tender due to pressure and gave actually the developer higher prices, a higher PPA afterwards. It's a dangerous thing, right? Because then everyone will come and say, well, then I also need more money. But it was, in my opinion, back then the right decision, because otherwise these projects would have failed. Well, in the end now most of them failed due to another reason. But what I try to say is I think it's important, it's okay to talk about new auctions and what can we learn for the future, but I think there's also a huge amount of projects sitting there at the moment without a business case that I think we as an industry need to find a solution to, because I think it's a lot of capacity.
Because that goes to the lack of bankable projects, as Mr. was talking about earlier.
Exactly. I think capital is there, projects are there, supply chain is at the moment there in offshore, but many of these projects are really lacking, the last % to really make it to FID. And this is actually quite sad. And in some of these projects, there's actually not that much that is required. So maybe governments have to reassess what they can do to push it over the line.
Because the key is a better or more stable financial framework offered by the governments. Is that sort of the key issue here, do you think? Yeah, Mr. Yori?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back on what happened in Japan, right? They auctioned it back in 2021. Back in the days, the inflation rate was fairly low. And then you had the 2022, 2023, where you had high inflation. And so for the bidders who participated in the auction, the expectation and the bet was that as you go down the timeline, the project cost will come down with the technological advancement. Now, we know now that it didn't happen. It actually went the other way around. It went higher up. So now, for those countries that were in that situation, or the investors in that situation, they are stuck with kind of a low tariff with no mechanism to reflect the higher inflation rate. Now, again, coming back to Philippines offshore wind, because of that lesson, from that lessons learned, I made it very clear to DOE that there has to be some mechanism to adjust for that sort of high inflation, particularly between the auction and the kind of the financial close or the notice to proceed to EPC, because from that point on, there are many mechanisms, many sort of tools that you can actually hedge. But between the auction and the financial close and the notice to proceed to EPC, that's when they are vulnerable to the inflation.
This goes to, this was a report from the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, a couple of weeks ago. And it was an interesting report about how solar and batteries are now very close to delivering firm power 24/7. And California recently reached that point for the first time ever, actually, where there was no gas in the mix, and it was batteries who took care of the final part of the demand. And John McAskill of OWC, he wrote an interesting piece on LinkedIn last week, and he pointed out that this also represented a market threat for wind, and that the wind industry must meet this challenge. And it goes to sort of the bankability issue, I think, that do we now see that, because we're talking a lot about sort of the long-term PPAs there, and the industry is very used to, I think, it's a PPA, it's secure for 30 years, that's it. But the mechanisms in the power markets are changing quite rapidly. So for the ones for the developers who actually also run the farm in the end for the 30 years, they have to operate also in the market And does this change the bankability, or does it change the numbers in the spreadsheets when you would get those kind of possibilities? Well, yeah, I could do a solar plant and I put a battery and problem solved. Is that sort of a new threat, like Mr. Maskaskal is saying? Yeah, anyone?
So certainly, if you see in India, the solar is very, very competitive, and if you add batteries on top of it, it gives the complete flexibility to store solar during the morning hours, and then you can use any of the 3 or 4 off-peak hours to dispatch solar power. And the cost of that energy is just 30-40% higher than the wind tariff. So while wind is something which is non-controllable, you may get something in off-peak, something in peak. This is a power that you are getting whenever you want, and it is just 30-40% costlier than the wind. So definitely, unless and until the wind industry improvise, get the tariffs down, get the cost down, the way BESS is moving, its value chain is increasing, and both in mobility and in our space, it's the same LFP which is getting used. So I clearly see the solar plus BESS as a very competing proposition as compared to wind, and that too you can get the dispatch whenever you want it. So it really needs a lot of rethinking in the wind industry, that how will you compete with this technology.
Mr. Entrant.
Yeah, thank you. I would say you're asking, is it a threat? I would rather say it's an opportunity. Why? Because, I mean, the energy system is changing so much, so tremendously right now, and there's so much need for all the technologies. And we're talking about a lot right now because we are like going over some thresholds already with renewables in some countries of the world, that we're talking about security of supply. Because, I mean, we need, of course, renewables in the system, but we also need them to be reliable, to be there like anytime we need them. And so we're talking about market designs, and market designs that are also incentivizing security of supply, so introducing and rewarding security of supply schemes. And that also, when it comes to renewables, means we need to bring flexibility into the system, and we need to bring storage into the system very much. And I don't think it's a threat to the industry. It's rather an opportunity, as I said, because, I mean, we really will change the energy system so much, and there will be so much opportunity for all the technologies, that we should rather focus on the positive sides of this story. And as we heard, I mean, we are at turmoil right now, globally speaking, and with a view on the energy markets, that I think renewables are so much on the positive side right now. We're getting so much tailwinds, so we should be, let's say, proud of the industry, proud of the technology, and really taking up on the chances rather on the threats.
Mr. Prinner, you're nodding.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's a mix that it's important to have a mix, and of course, with the growth also with data centers, obviously you cannot just select one technology or the other. At the same time, also Mr. Sharma said at the beginning that in India there was so much solar power installed that at the end, obviously, you needed compensation from other sources of energy. The same is happening in Australia, where 30 gigawatts installed in solar. And now, obviously, wind, with all the backlog, is coming in. Just as we signed 2 major partnerships in the last 2 years in Australia, one to stabilize the grid, because obviously solar has this element, and the other one is to provide gas turbines for covering the peak load. And with these 2 elements together, you can deploy even more wind power, because you will stabilize, you will have a grid stabilized already. So I fully agree, it's a matter of mix. I think it's also a matter of mix in terms of value creation over the long term, because of course this turbine has to be also maintained, and creates a lot of local competencies too. That's another advantage, obviously, for the different geographies we're operating.
It's a bit off track, but still, you're a turbine supplier, of course, and does this also change things also for the wind turbine makers? Because now you want turbines that you want really to turn off and start again. at quite a different, in quite a different pattern than maybe in the old days, because sometimes, yeah, no, I just want to stop it because I want to load to my battery from the grid because it's cheap.
Yeah.
And then maybe I want to do 50% because I want to just charge my battery for 3 hours. And now I'm going to go full speed for 3 hours because now the prices are good. So
Definitely. I mean, of course, technology is evolving drastically. Tomorrow there is an interesting panel where our head of technology is joining. And it's actually really possible. You can obviously tailor the power output. You can stop. You have an inertia also on the turbine, so it's stabilizing. Sometimes it's also grid forming for certain aspects. So obviously, because it has mechanical parts, can support also the grid stabilization. That's absolutely true.
Mm. If there are any questions from the floor, I'm happy to take one or two in a moment. But we're getting close to the end here, and I'd like to ask you a couple of questions before we finish. And now we touched upon sort of the current state of affairs, a bit about the frameworks and all the topics, and the lack of bankable projects being a core issue, I think, from here. But if you can pinpoint one issue out of all of this, what is the biggest challenge for the wind industry when you look at the Asia-Pacific region today, one market or the overriding issue? And if you can be specific, I will be grateful. But Mr. Prina, maybe you can go first.
I think it's not a matter of challenge, I would say. And if everything can be solved and sorted. It's a composition of elements, and just to make an example, even small elements can increase cost in a project. For instance, a good example in the Pacific area, there are very mountainous areas and forestry. And of course, because of the seismic element of sliding down, there were some new legislations issued 3-4 years ago about the consolidation of the soil. But of course, there are general legislations, and when you look at the specific of the project, this might really increase the cost of civil work substantially. When actually, probably if we look in the detail of the project itself, it can be probably tailored and still achieve the same effect of consolidating the ground, but make the project feasible. It's a small example, obviously, but there are many others where we're really working on site-specific optimizations can make the difference of the percentage that Tim was mentioning before in making a project feasible or not feasible. And our role as OEM, by the way, is to really extract from every site the maximum we can, knowing our turbines and with the track record we have, which is really something we are extensively doing in our markets.
Thank you. Mr. Rentschmidt, what would you say?
Yeah, it's hard to pick one. I would say if it's what is the most urging one, that is definitely industrialization, scale, and bringing bankable volume projects into the market. But I would like to emphasize maybe one more thing we didn't touch today at all so far, and that is infrastructure. So when we talk about projects being implemented, I mean, we talk very much about market, we talked very much about political ambitions and bankable volume. All this is right, and we do need it, but what we also need is the infrastructure for it. So we're talking harbor infrastructure when it comes to offshore. We're talking vessels when it comes to offshore, but we're talking also roads, streets, transportation means when it comes to onshore. So that is also something where political decision makers can do some support and progressive on the frameworks, not only on the frameworks, but also on the infrastructure itself. And then when we're talking frameworks, it has to be said that permits, permissions, all the administrative stuff, it's killing us sometimes when it comes to implementation. So we're less talking about, I would say, the rather strategic concerns and how ambitious are countries. There are high ambitions, and it's easy to raise ambitions. That is just like a strategy, yeah? But the real challenge is bring it into projects, so on the ground issues where it comes to implementation. So talking about infrastructure, transportation permits, all that stuff, administration, that makes projects hard to realize, and that's something we have to work on, definitely.
Thank you. Mr. Yoy, what's your thought on this?
Yeah, I kind of agree with the sentiment that it's not just one big problem. It's kind of small issues scattered across everywhere, but kind of regulatory stability, PPA bankability, and the infrastructure, including ports, grid robustness, in order for the grid to be able to absorb the intermittent power. But the commonality I see across all these issues is really the host country government. They have to have the vision and also the capacity to design the framework and the auction and align that with the supporting industry and infrastructure like ports, because I've been speaking with DOE, but when it comes to port, it's DOTR. So the coordination across different parts of the government in one particular country, in every country, I think that's kind of the overarching sort of point that I wanted to make.
Thank you. Mr. Fischer, what will you say?
Putting on the offshore hat here on the panel, I think, and if I only can pick one, I think it's inconsistencies and ever-changing auction designs. I mean, across Asia. I mean, I think I know there are good intentions why governments are changing things, but it is. I mean, as a developer, right? It's very difficult to act against this. I mean, local content up, local content out, double-sided CFDs, fixed pricing, whatever. I think this has to improve.
I need to add one follow-up question to that, because in Europe we've also seen, changing support systems, and it seems now to be sort of moving towards CFDs in most countries. Is there something to learn in other countries, other markets in the world, from the way Europe has sort of found its way into maybe one solution?
Well, a double-sided CFD is just one part of an auction design, but I think it was said before, I think this would have been, for example, a good element on the Japanese auctions early on, that we would have not ended up where we are. So I think this is already, I think the industry is probably in alignment there, that a double-sided CFD is a good mechanism, one element of a successful auction. I think we should also bring to all markets.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Sharma, what would you say?
I think the biggest challenge in wind is execution. So when we execute a solar project, we just do a boundary wall around the land, and then a lot of workers can work within the boundary wall and do execution very fast. When you do a wind project on a footprint basis, you have to acquire land at different places, build pathways. That's one. The second is that the number of regulatory approvals which are required to take for erecting a wind turbine in India is too many as compared to solar. The height restriction, the 5D, 7D, the distance that you have to maintain from wind turbine to the other. So all these things makes it, I'm only talking about onshore. Offshore obviously would be 10 times tougher. So I think the real constraint in the wind industry that we are facing in India is execution is more than double the difficult as compared to a solar plant.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? There is a hand there on the fourth row. If someone can give her a microphone. Please stand up, and it's easier also for the assistant. Yeah, Dorothy will have give that. Please state your name.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is Xiang Yu, the wind analyst at Bloomberg NEF. And apologies to Mr. Prina, I would like to raise a question about Chinese turbines. So to Yoi-san, I know that ADB has been financing Chinese turbines in Uzbekistan and Laos, and Chinese turbines has also been very successful in markets such as in India. So I wonder, Yoi-san, what are the most important criteria specifically when you consider financing turbines? Is it how you assess track records, and is international certificate important to your finance?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. So whether it's Chinese sort of manufacturer or Japanese or Europeans, we obviously look at technical capabilities and design suitability. That's from a kind of a technical perspective. And the other sort of element or aspect is environmental and social aspect. So we do want to kind of ensure that it is sort of being manufactured and sort of, the whole value chain is sustainable. These days we tend to not only kind of just look at the technical and technological side of things, but also we do sort of look into how those are being manufactured and what we call a supply chain due diligence, regardless of which company that the manufacturers are. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And I have room for one more. There he goes, please.
Hi. Thomas van Schaik with CEO of Wind Power in China. What I'm hearing is that there's a lot of fragmentation when it comes to standards. Mr. Rentschmidt mentioned it specifically in Europe. I used to be involved in aviation industry, and we also noticed this. That's why the Society of Automotive Engineers actually organized that all the OEMs, the operators of aircraft, the supply chain, material suppliers, the manufacturers, but also maintenance come together with regulatory agencies like EASA and FAA to introduce standards so that we can all follow, but not just follow, but have a standard that gives us strength. As a unit, we are all doing the same job. We are all in the same business, but it sounds to me that everybody is doing their own thing. Nobody is really working globally together to get this to a higher platform. My opinion is that if we all do work together, we can raise this to a higher platform and reap the benefits. Maybe to Mr. Rentschmidt in particular, what is your opinion in getting together as an industry and establishing those standards that we can all benefit from?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I totally agree. Standardization or harmonization would be helpful, as I said already. And that ranges from markets to permissions to things that are that you are facing when you are doing the execution of the project. Like always the same thing. It's governmental differences between markets, between countries, between regions that makes it hard to bring in scale into projects. So there's definitely the need for overcome these problems. So but what would be the institution or the platform, as you called it, I guess, where you can overcome these issues and find this harmonization? I think it's not existing so far, and yet might be a good idea to form such an institution maybe. And then we also should talk about security issues on these platforms, for instance. So what level of reliance we would like to have for the turbines, for instance. So it might be a good opportunity and a good idea to think about such a platform to discuss different things. But it should be a global platform then, probably.
Thank you. We are out of time. I want to thank the panel, Parag Sharma, President of WIPA, Yuichiro Joy, Principal Investment Specialist at the Asian Development Bank, Eduardo Prina, CEO, Asia Pacific Onshore of Siemens Gamesa, Tim Fisher, Global Executive Director of Rambøll, and Dennis Rentschmidt, Managing Director of VDMA Power Systems. Thank you so much. We will reconvene after lunch at 1:30. And lunch will be at the conference arena, out the doors, through the crowded area outside, and to your left. Thank you. Thank you.